couple. Most of them are not very good at climbing with their wings. So the thoughts were that some four-legged type of dinosaur, like a thecodon or a reptile, would climb up the trees. And so they thought thecodons were maybe the ancestors of the birds. They put feathers on and then they could glide from tree to tree. It seems more likely, and most people now feel like that it was the theropod dinosaurs that were runners were the real ancestors. This theory then is called the cursorial theory. You remember from deer, we talked about deer being runners, that's cursorial. So the cursorial theory would be that theropod running type dinosaurs were the ancestors. And they probably weren't very good climbers with all these feathers on their wings. But maybe they didn't have to be great climbers. You know, they can get up in the tree and then that helps them. So why did the feathers come about in the first place? Well, it probably wasn't for flying. It might have been to jump up higher in the tree. You can flap your wings and go higher, like chickens do. They're not very good flyers, but they can flap their wings and jump pretty high. Or maybe just for, well, this idea was that maybe they used them to trap those big insects at the time, like a big net. And that's a little far-fetched, but maybe. But at any rate, everybody pretty much agrees that the theropods were the ancestors, and somehow or other they climbed up. And there's some additional information too, in that we do see feathers on some of the theropods. We can actually look very closely at Archaeopteryx, that first bird. Part of the reason we know or call it the first bird is that it had feathers that were veined, had a vein down there with little extensions off that makes them very light and really important for flying. We actually find feathers on some other theropods, but they're not very well defined. So this is the first Archaeopteryx that was found in Bavaria. It's got this, its neck was bent back, so whenever you see it, you know this was the very first fossil that was found. But you can see the feathers way out here on this hand, and it also has feathers on the tail.
But isn't that debated though?
Excuse me?
Isn't there a debate going on between the Archaeopteryx and the I'll think of it in a minute.
Well, there are other fossil theropods, but basically, I'll show you some of the other pictures from your book. Now, there's a Chinese one that they said,
Yeah, she's kind of going back and forth.
Yeah,
Which one is?
it's probably easiest just to think of Archaeopteryx as being the main one. Because most of the others, the feathers were not very defined. All right, well, what I thought I'd do is go through adaptations that birds need, and then we can see what the theropods had, might have to evolve. So what are the big driving forces evolutionarily for birds to be able to fly? What do they need to be able to do? Yeah. What adaptations do they need? What, in general? What?
Well, they need hollow bones.
Hmm?
They needed hollow bones.
Why? Why do they need hollow
For
bones?
lighter weight.
Okay, weight. So one of the big issues is weight reduction. If you're gonna have to glide, or if you're gonna have to fly, then you need to be lighter. What's this? There's a second big. Excuse me.
Warm-blooded,
Why?
because they need lots more energy.
Okay. Metabolic energy. You've got to be strong. Part of the reason human flight has, by one person flying. If you've ever seen any of those early videos of people trying to jump off cliffs with wings and stuff, you know, they always crash. Not because it's not aerodynamic sound, it's because they're not strong enough to flap the wings in the right way. And so a lot of the adaptations that birds need relate to energy and energy production. So if we look at the skeletal features, a lot of them, like Aaron was saying, are related to well, hollow bones, one thing, but other bones are lost completely, and then others are fused and things like that. Now, Archaeopteryx, surprisingly, had solid bones. It didn't have hollow bones yet, but we have hollow bones in some of the theropods. So it was available basically as the stuff of evolution. Just didn't happen to be in Archaeopteryx. One of the other things that you do is as I said, you can get rid of bones and you can fuse others. So a good example of that would be the hips. The hips are all fused together into one strong bone. If you like to eat the back, then you're eating the synsacrum. What it includes is some sacral vertebra. It includes the hips and I guess that's it. But it's one big bone that the humerus is going to, that the femur is going to attach into. We got rid of some of the fingers. Again, it's extra weight. We can just stick the feathers out on some long fingers. We start with 3. The dinosaurs had 3, and we'll see 3, although they're reduced in size in birds. They'll have one long one and some remnants of some others. But bipedalism, well, if you're going to have wings or feathers on your upper arms, then you need to be able to run around just using your hind legs. And so shifting the way in which the leg is connected to the hips and ankles is real important. Feathers, obviously, that's kind of the key.
Jack, quick question. If the Archaeopteryx had solid bones, how can we be so sure that it actually could fly instead of being more like
Well,
ostrich?
it's possible that it wasn't a regular fly, but the wings are so, the feathers are so advanced that there's, people pretty much think that it did. But you're right, no, it doesn't it also has a long tail, which is going to give it some extra weight too, which we get rid of in birds. So it's possible it was too heavy, yeah. It still had teeth too. Teeth are heavy. But it had feathers, and feathers are critical for being able to fly, at least with birds. We do have a lot of fossils that give us some ideas of how things change. The other place we've got some information about feathers in particular is through new stuff we do with genes in development. There's a lot of stuff people can figure out how feathers are developing in embryos, and they can look at genes that control it, and then we look back and see when those genes started showing up. So there's some pretty cool things there. I'm not a real Evo-Devo person. I don't know that literature real well, but your book spends some time talking about it. So the theropods, though, that were similar to the birds were the dromaeosaurs. That'd be like Velociraptor. It's in this group. What's interesting is that we've got some of these that have feathers. I'll show you a picture of those in a minute. So this figure's kind of nice because it shows some of the changes that needed to take place to end up with some of our birds. So change the hips, put feathers on. They've still got a tail. The feathers become veined. A veined feather is one with a structure down the middle that can bring blood in, and then smaller structures off to the side. The tail then becomes smaller, and it actually turns into what's called a pygostyle. Pygostyle is just the remnants of the caudal vertebra, so they're very small. They tend to be fused together, and the feathers, the tail feathers of the birds, just stick in. One of the things when we used to stuff birds in this class. If you cut just a little too far down on the pygostyle, you end up cutting all the veins that go into the insert in there, and all the feathers on the tail fall off. So it was always frustrating to the students because they'd be dissecting, cutting the skin off the bird. Everything was going well, and then they would cut just a little too close up to the tail and just fall right off. So, but we've got evidence, we've got a fossil that has a pygostyle. We see a sternum. Now the sternum has a very important structure on it in the more advanced birds, and that's this keel. It's called a carina, and it allows for muscle attachment for very powerful big muscles, breast muscles, that are going to be involved in flying. So that shows up in some of the earlier fossils. I'll explain the alula later.
Dude, I had to activate
So we've
this.
got some birds that could fly. The Ichthyornis is one that you might have read about or heard about. It's like a seagull type bird that's been found in the fossil record, but it had teeth. So it definitely can fly because it has a carina, but still had teeth. And then our advanced birds, the Neornithes, are going to have obviously all the characteristics of the modern birds. I think this is the one you were thinking of, Aaron, that they've talked a lot about in terms of flying. But it really is a dromaeosaur. This one was found in China, and it has feathers, but they're not they're not really veined for. They don't appear to really be involved in flying. So why they have it? Well, it probably related to metabolism. Feathers are really good at insulating, and so if you want to get your body temperature up so you can run faster, or metabolize your food faster, a lot of those things, feathers are really valuable for that, in terms of keeping your body warm. And one of the things about birds is that they are endothermic. They are warm-blooded. There's some evidence that some of the dinosaurs were too, and the feathers sure bear that out. Yes.
What was the keel for the carina? What did that help with?
Okay, so, and I'll get back to those, all the anatomy again, but it's for attachment of the breast muscle. So they have a really large breast muscle, which then attaches to the wings. It's just is missing one of its wings. But at any rate, they are important for flying.
Did you say they were called?
The carina is basically a keel on the sternum. So they have a very flat, large sternum instead of the little one you've got. And then on top, on it has a keel. Correct. Okay, so some other reptilian features that didn't show up in those others very closely are, well, they've got a lower jaw that has several bones in it. when we get to mammals, we're gonna have a single bone in the dentition. But we have a lower jaw, even though doesn't have teeth and it's shaped a little differently than in the dinosaurs. It's got that relationship. And it articulates with the skull on a bone called the quadrate bone. If you remember, the quadrate bone in snakes was that bone that became the long, that extra long bone that allowed snakes to eat really large prey, or at least macrostomata snakes. In mammals, it's going to be a different part of the skull that articulates with. Notice no that big process on the skull of mammals. We don't have it. They have a single occipital condyle as opposed to two that mammals will have. So that the head sits on top of the atlas, but it's on top of the cervical vertebrae and it can move around. Owls, for example, can turn their head all the way backwards. And reptiles have a single occipital condyle too. They still only have one bone in the ear, middle ear bone, instead of the three that mammals are going to have. And so what's going to happen is some of these bones here are going to be part of the inner ear in mammals. The brain case is getting a little bigger. The brains are more important, but not exactly the same parts that are in mammals. If you're going to fly, you've got to be able to see well. You need to have good depth perception. And so if you're flying and the wind is pushing on your eyeball, it's going to compress it, right? Which would change the focal length, which would make it hard to determine depth. So what birds have done is they have a ring of bone. They've glued it on here to the top so you can see it. It actually floats on top of the eyeball, and it helps support the eye and prevent that deformation that might occur when they fly. And that sclerotic ring, as it's called, is found in even thecagon reptiles. So a lot of these reptilian features are already there. Here's a hand. The hand's a little bit modified, but not in the early birds. They tend to have the 3 fingers. Theropods have really reduced their 4th and 5th one. And in birds, we've still got evidence of all 3, but not a lot. We've got the 3rd finger here is the main one, and then this 4th finger that just got remnants of it, and there's a little teeny bit of the 2nd finger. So they still have 3 fingers, but one of them is the main one. And notice it fused together too, into one long digit. Feathers. Well, I'm going to talk more about feathers, but right now we're talking about how things are like reptiles. Well, feathers are very much developmentally like scales. They grow out of the dermis and they're covered by epidermis, and so they come out in little pockets like this. And just like the overlapping scales of a reptile. They just happen to grow longer. They have a vein down the center, and then these little extensions off the side. Or I'm sorry, this is the vein. The hollow structure that goes down the center is called the branchius. But it's got blood vessels in it and can feed these so they can continue to grow. And then one of the things that distinguishes different kinds of feathers is the fact that these little teeny, basically what's happened here is this thing is just split, fragmented up into lots of little pieces. What what makes the feather very strong is that parts of the feather, the vein, connect to each other. They have little hooks, and they'll hook to each other so that they're very strong. If you've ever watched a bird preen itself, what it's doing is it's separating out these hooks and making it nice and smooth. So you have a feather like this called a contour feather that covers the body and the wing and forms the wings. Very strong, but also very, very light. And we'll see some other types of feathers where those hooks are not there and they're more fluffy, and they'll be more involved in insulation. But in lab, we'll take a look at some of the feathers and look for these hooks. They're also laid down in a pattern on the skin, much like they are in reptiles, in what are called tracks. So they occur in tracks. One of the things about this is that how the tracks are laid out are one of the clues to bird relationships, which ones are related to each other. How these tracks, for example, some birds have feather tracks all over the whole body. Others have some bare areas like these do. So those are used to help in separating out the orders of birds. But reptiles have theirs that way too. So we've got good fossils. So when did the actual bird, the first bird, evolve? Like Aaron said, there are some arguments about it. It really doesn't matter too much, other than I kind of want you to have the ability to compare when birds show up relative to other things were out there. So they're pretty late. Jurassic is the time of the dinosaurs. And that's when our first Archaeopteryx shows up. Now its lineage is off to the side a little bit. It's not, that's one of the things about fossils you need to keep in mind is that they don't make, they're not linear things. They're oftentimes something that comes off the side that maybe didn't succeed, but it at least shows us some of the things that were important for those that did. So if we've got this lineage that goes all the way up to the Neornithes, the extant birds, then we've got all these little side branches of things that tell us some of the characteristics, but aren't necessarily, aren't on that straight line lineage. And Archaeopteryx is off, maybe not real far, because it's pretty similar, but it is off to the side. And it was found in the Jurassic period. There's some other there's several other lineages of birds that we have pretty good records on some of these. Don't worry about them, other than, you might have run into Ichthyornis and Hesperornis. There are a couple of the aquatic birds that we've known of for a long time, so they show up in other books and things too. We really want to be concerned with this group here, the Neornithes. So these will be the extant birds, and I'm going to go through a lot of the orders. But the first thing to do is to break them up into two groups. And it's based on the palate of the roof of the mouth. We have some that have a palate that's like the primitive forms, and so it's called Paleognathe. The Paleognathe palate is in a primitive palate, and we're going to see it in the flightless birds that we have around the world. Things like ostriches and emus and stuff like that. And there's one bird that flies in the group called the tinamou. And so there's not very many in this group. There's some fossil ones that I'll talk a little bit about in terms of biogeography. But most of the birds have a modern palate. And it has to do with how a couple of the bones of the vomeral bone underneath the nostrils come together.
What do you mean by palate?
That's your, the roof of your mouth.
Okay, oh, good.
Palate.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So the roof of the mouth is formed of a couple different bones with this one. And I'm gonna show you, I'll show you some pictures of it. And this, but these guys have modern palates. And then there's two groups of those. There are the songbirds, and these are the passerines, and then non-passerines. But they can still sing, they just don't have to have the pretty songs that we associate with those.
Would you say they were called the ones with the modern palate? Is there a name?
Okay, so they're the neonathi. So the paleonathi and the neonathi. Nathi, you remember that this means mouth, or naphthostones, remember the jawed fish? So it's the same derivative. So this is new mouth and old mouth. I think that's probably a good, I'm gonna start talking about other, not flying and wings and stuff like that, so probably enough, probably not needed birds just yet. So next week you will. So be sure to come with questions on Wednesday and we'll start on
Non-passerines, that's
the songbirds.
I mean, that's that's a class that they're defining based on phylogeny or based on?
Yes.
Right.
So if
Two tiers in the bucket.
separation occurred right about, here in the, between the Paleocene and the Holocene. I don't know what the years were, but this group separated off.
And you're saying that was
Are the crocodiles gonna be with the bird?
No, I want to go ahead and put, I mean, I know it's probably not right, but I'm one of those who just can't get rid of reptiles entirely, so.
Okay, cause I don't remember going over the crocodile.
We didn't.
say anything about crocodiles.
We didn't do
It was
anything
only
with snakes.
snakes.
Okay,
I think you're like, oops.
it wasn't much, okay. I'll tell you what, I guess I'll do, it's weird, I don't know why I didn't. I guess I won't put crocodiles and alligators on this test, it'll go on with the birds. Glad you brought that up.
That's why I looked at you funny when you said crocodile and alligator, I was like,
Okay. There, it's actually in your book with the archosaur, so it's fine. I'll do it.
I get to do my seminar.
All right.
Ah, so
I'm gonna have to go back to my test and take a couple questions off. Know what to do.